and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Amanda. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Yes, I'm super excited that I get to share this platform with you all, being that I'm a sibling myself. So thank you for having me. I'm super excited to pour into other siblings today and share a little bit of my heart and my story with you guys.
Can you please lay out your family structure, birth order, your siblings, who has a disability, etc.?
So I am an older sister, or no, I don't know why I said that. I am a younger sister. Of course, if most of y'all are siblings listening, we kind of always feel like the older sibling sometimes as well. And so my brother and I are 3 years apart. So he is 42 and I am about to turn 40. And he was the 11th person in the United States to ever be born with his disability.
Oh, wow.
So he has a very rare chromosome disability. So he was born with 4 more X's than he does Y's. I think now it's more known. People call it 4XXXXXY syndrome. But yeah, we didn't know that then, obviously. My mom was really, a lot of the platforms and the things that I do now in my career is really driven for families because I really struggled as a watching my mom be the only mom, right? Or my dad being the only dad out there. When he was born, he was the 11th person in the United States to ever be born with it. And so my mom was like, this is before internet. This was before there's social media. You know, there was no, like, they brought like a dictionary of disabilities into my parents, like a medical journal, and just flipped to Down syndrome and was like, this is as close as we can get to telling you about your child. And mom was like, well, what about the other 10 individuals in, and she was like, can I get their phone number? Can I get their address? Like, can I connect with them to understand? And they said, we advised all of them to
Oh
institutionalize
my
and they didn't go home with their
gosh.
child. So my mom was the first to actually go home with my brother.
Which is super cool. That's so sad for like the other 10, but like that's oh man, that's crazy.
So luckily, mom and my parents are still married together. My brother still lives at home. Not that, so his cognitive level is really that of, it depends on the topic. I always say like he's street smart. um, he is street smart. He's like Nintendo savvy, but like everyday like hygiene, independent living type of
Mm,
skills he struggles with.
yeah.
Um, Social skills, sometimes he doesn't know what's appropriate versus inappropriate, but he can, he's verbal, he's able to communicate his needs and his wants. Um, so yeah, life was definitely interesting in the living the sibling dynamic and navigating life before, growing up, I always thought we were the only family. I didn't know, like, there was no such thing as internet. So, and in my hometown, in a rural town, like, there were no, like, we went to Special Olympics,
Okay.
but it still didn't, I didn't see other siblings. Like, I didn't see the dynamics that we had. It was just, we were going there for my brother to do the sport. There was no way of connecting. Life then was so different than it is now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just always thought we were the only ones.
And that's so interesting too, because it's like not only like in your hometown, it's already kind of like isolated, but then you really like had absolutely no idea. Because especially if those other 10 families they institutionalized, you would have like, even if you had met one of them, you would have grown up so different because they would have grown up with their sibling like not in their home, but they know that their sibling has that disability, which is a very like different psychological thing than like living with them at home and meeting other people who live with them at home.
Right. Well, and even now, I think, and maybe because I'm totally wrapped up in this world, in what I do and how I do it. So I support a lot of families, and I'm an advocate for a lot. And so I think, I think what I've learned, and it kind of makes me feel sad in my own way, I guess. But Nick is my brother's name is Nick. I don't know if I shared that before, but you know, we don't fall in autism, we don't fall Down syndrome, we don't fall in
Yeah.
cerebral palsy. And so, like, among what's already feels isolating and like you're on, you know, this journey by yourself, we're even further in that because I don't know where we fit. You know, he has some complex medical issues too. So, like, sometimes we can resonate with that. But you know, there's not a place for him. He's kind of like fell between the cracks a little bit. And I think that's why I spend my whole entire life and my career doing what I do.
And that makes sense because it's kind of like it's and that's what I thought was so interesting for when I started this podcast was because my sister is on the autism spectrum, so obviously that's well nowadays even when she got diagnosed wasn't as popular, but that's still a greater percentage. But now it's like I personally feel like everyone just kind of just says that they have a sibling or they're on the spectrum or whatever, which is like kind of a different conversation. But I thought it was so fascinating, like the I kind of hit this point where I'm like, oh, everyone I'm interviewing, their sibling is on the spectrum on some level, and I'm like, which is great to be able to connect, but like there's a whole other world of people who it's not autism. There's all these other things that I don't know about, right? Whether it's like medical related or like more chromosome related, and all these things, and it's so interesting because it's like probably like how my sister grew up and how your brother grew up are probably like absolutely nothing alike, but there's so many still common thematic things that you and I can have in common, regardless of all those like different factors, which is so cool of why like technically like all siblings can connect even if they're like specific instances, but it is really nice to have the specific ones because you just click so much better, you know, when you find families or other like just people in society who understand kind of the more like nuanced things that you're talking about.
Right. Well, and I think that what I've learned too, in connecting with a lot of siblings over the years, and I don't know that I shared that, but what I do so I knew at 5 years old I wanted to be a special education teacher to teach people like my brother. So I became a special education teacher. I have my master's in my bachelor's and my master's in exceptional education with an autism emphasis. And so then 11 years ago, I started my own nonprofit to support individuals with disabilities. And so now I support over 430 families
Wow, it's
of
amazing.
all different disabilities. And so what I've learned through this process and coaching siblings and understanding and is that, to your point, I think is what I'm trying to get to is, even though this is isolated, like, you won't understand, you know, Nick's disability, and I might not understand the traits or the characteristics that come with your sibling's disability. However, what we do have in common and what I've learned, and this is I've done an ebook of, I wasn't able to process my emotions and articulate the emotions I experienced as a kid until I was an adult.
Yes,
And
100%.
so now I'm starting to understand and be able to place, and that comes with emotional intelligence. I always tell families and siblings, like, when you're growing up, you don't have the emotional intelligence or life experiences to understand what you're going through. Like, it's totally normal. Like, there's times where you're going to feel guilty. That will never go away, but your guilt and how you feel guilt will change over time, right? How we feel, you know, embarrassed. There was times I was embarrassed as a kid. I remember my middle school years being so traumatic for me because it was the experiences I was as a young female trying to figure out who I am,
Yep.
you know, find my boyfriend, find these girls that are your friends that, I mean, are vicious.
Right? Yeah.
So, and then I'm having to like process, like, my family's different. We're different. Like, oh, I can't do that because like, you don't understand my family. Like, I can't do that. Right. And so, like, then there's that resentment that comes, or I always say, and I always give siblings permission, like, there was a time I never hated my brother. I never hated my brother. I have nothing but love for my brother, and I never resented my brother. However, I hated his disability at times. And I think we don't give ourselves permission. And that's really what I coach families a lot on, is that we should be able to feel our feelings. And I never was able to articulate that, nor did I want to share some of my feelings because I didn't want to burden my family with already what they were burdened with.
Yes.
And they didn't shut me down, but they never were able to validate my feelings because they wanted to push through my feelings.
Yeah. Yep.
Because
I
they
feel
were
you.
already past that. They were already grieved that. They already were able to process it. Plus, when they received the diagnosis, they were already emotionally intelligent enough
Yeah.
and had life experiences to process that. Whereas us as siblings, we don't have that, right? And I didn't know life to be any different. And I think that is the cool thing. Like, I don't guess I wished anything different. I wished for different experiences, but now that I'm older, I'm glad I didn't have that. Like, my experiences were meant for me.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think I could go on for days of like just these emotions that we feel that I never was able to articulate when I was younger.
There's so many good things that you said that like I'm on board with everything that you said because it's been so enlightening to now have the vocabulary to illustrate how I felt. Like I had never dreamed that that would have been possible. And for me personally, it was through a lot of therapy and continually to go see a therapist to like work through that. But it's amazing because now I can have these conversations with my friends and with my husband and like even with my coworkers, you know, like over time, right? And if they'll say something, I'm like I can now like internally go, okay, I feel this because this reminds me of like when I was 5 and my sister like threw my stuff into the toilet and then my parents instead of saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, that sucks," they then went after my sister and just dug everything out of the toilet. Right? And that causes a certain emotion of like, "Wait, like I'm the one whose stuff got destroyed. Like why are we not talking about me?" Right? And all those feelings like they don't go away, right? But they come back like if you're with coworkers and they don't dump yourself in the toilet, but they kind of disregard you, they overshadow you, whatever. Like those same feelings are back. But now I can identify like, okay, this reminds me of that incident. That's why I'm upset. It's not because I'm upset at you specifically, but your actions are the things that are upsetting me, and
Mhm.
that changes. It changes so much in how like I yeah, process information, how I show up, how I can communicate now, and I can say, "Hey, I really didn't appreciate that," right? Because when you're 5, I'm not going to tell my parents that. Like, I don't even know what's happening. I just know why is my stuff in the toilet.
Right, right. And it seems like I think that one of the common things that like I talk with families about to be an advocate for as siblings, like I feel like I'm the voice for a lot of siblings to because parents are so scared of like, are they going to resent me? Like they're showing signs of jealousy. Like I need them to build a relationship. But again, I think that we as siblings have to naturally figure out life for ourselves and have our own identity.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that I loved, but I hated. And now, like, I guess it did shape me for the person that I am today. But I was never just Amanda. I was always like, it was never, how are you? Like, how's your brother? Like, if my brother was missing from, like, everybody loved Nick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was the life of the party.
Okay.
And so when I would show up, and he was sick a lot, right? And so when we would show up and Nick was maybe absent from there, it was everybody always like, do you have a funny Nick story? Because Nick was always doing something crazy stupid and it made people laugh. And it was kind of our humor that allowed us to do life, like running the lawnmower through the house, like that was a thing. Buying 20 videos of Girls Gone Wild on my grandma's credit card, like stuff that only we could laugh about.
Yeah.
But people, that was how we almost shared our story to come alongside Nick. But then like those people were more interested in that than me. And I think that
Okay.
it was hard because I never had my own identity. They always asked about Nick first. And I felt like so I think whenever parents only know how to articulate that they're just jealous, like like they're jealous for all the attention that goes to and I mean, yeah, maybe it's jealousy, but it's not even jealousy. It might come off as jealousy, like because we don't know how to articulate our feelings, but it's also we want to feel validated and seen as a person
Yes.
as we're trying to identify who we are without being the special sibling to our brother or sister, right? Like if I've been called a superhero, once I've been called a superhero, a guardian angel,
Yep.
you're so patient. Like
Yep.
they expect me to wear that as a badge of honor. And it's not for me. Like I become numb to that, right? Like they didn't see me for me. And that's not all the time, but I feel like that's the story I'm having to navigate a lot with siblings and a lot with families that they don't understand.
Yeah, and I remember like at the very beginning, I was like, "Oh, that's a compliment." Right? Like when you're right, like when you're really little, you kind of it's the first time you're like, "Oh, like I help push the stroller," kind of like, but that's like kind of regular. You can be like a typical kid and kind of feel that too, but I remember I got really tired of like, "Oh, she's such a good girl and she's so quiet and she's like so helpful." And I was like, I don't like I'm more than that. Like I do all these
Mhm.
other things and yes, I'm helpful, but it's interesting how like that overshadows everything I would have done. Like I could have like
100%.
aced I could have like won like $1 million and I still would have just been, "Oh, she's so good." It's like, "Wait, but I just won $1 million," right? Like it's so shaping and it's so hard too because especially like and I think this next part might be dependent on like who your parents talk to and like their community, right? It's like then I just start to take that and go, "Oh, like, well, I guess my name is Charlene and I'm just an older sister to someone on the autism spectrum," right? And it becomes like and I remember I would talk like that to like everybody. I would just be like, "Oh, my sister's like on the autism spectrum," and I would then like talk about her more than me, which like when I think back on that, I'm like, wow, like because I just didn't know who I was because everyone kept bypassing me to get to her or my parents because it's like, oh, how are your parents like dealing with that issue? It's like, well, I don't know, and really like I will get that sometimes now, and I'm still working through as an adult how to like properly respond in a like kind of respectful but stop asking me way, and I haven't
Mhm,
figured that out
mhm.
yet, but it like that's so hard, even as an adult, I feel, to like kind of I just want to be me, like stop asking.
Well, and I think, I mean, obviously as an adult now, this is what I do. It's funny, I have made the announcement, like I'm currently writing a book, like a memoir of a sibling's perspective that's
Okay.
gonna come out in August. And it's really been a lot of therapy for me. I'm like, dang, this opened up some wounds a little bit. But um, I think when I was writing this chapter about what what we're kind of talking about, of like when this people think they're being kind of helpful, I guess, or like you're such a blessing, you're such a great helper, your brother, or in your case, like your sister, is so blessed to have you, sibling. And so I think although it was very prideful in the beginning, but as I processed, as I always felt like, man, I'm gonna disappoint these people. I can't mess up, or
Mm-hmm.
I can't, what if I fail? What if I don't want to be the good sibling? Like, what if, like, then everybody had this expectation and this bar, and it was only how it was applied to my brother and not anything else. Really, that's how I found softball. Softball, I invested my entire life in. I became a very good athlete in softball, but that's really allowed me to create my own story. Then I
Mm.
became this softball player, like, and I was really good because it was the distraction to be able to create my own story that wasn't the sibling. And so, I don't it I think I dabble back and forth. Now, most of the, when I on Instagram, and I do share a lot of my stories with my brother, and, those emotions even now and prior to, and people are, "You're doing God's work. You're just such a sweet sibling," and the expectation that I'm gonna be his caretaker. I am gonna be my brother's caretaker. I know that. Like, I have no other, that's not for every sibling, though, and I think that we as a society expect that that's the journey, and I think that I wish that I could change that. Like, that's my choice, that's something that I want to do,
Yeah.
um, but that's not everyone's, and I think that when we condition the mindset to these siblings that They feel less than if they don't own up to that, and they
Mm.
I struggle of coaching some of the siblings because they feel like their only value to the family is if they are the caretaker, the helper, and they just can't be the sibling. I feel like my parents, if I could, like, compliment anything that they did right, they did a lot of things right, but the one thing that stands out to me the most is my parents, whether it created more work for them, because it did, they allowed us to fight as siblings, and I remember that, like, we would fight over the front seat, and man, my brother could fight, but they just allowed us, and they never made the excuse, like, "You can't do that, he has a disability."
Okay.
They never did that. They always made it about something else, but they would just be like, "Brothers and sisters don't do that. Y'all can't punch each other," or, like, "You can't blame your brother for that." But it was never like you couldn't do that, like, they didn't make him be in this eggshell for me, and I couldn't crack it. And I never got in trouble for doing sibling things that would be of a typical sibling structure. That's what they wanted for us. So that's how we built relationships. And my brother, it was probably the best thing for him, honestly. It taught him life lessons of consequences, like, like,
Yes. Yeah.
don't get in the tricycle and have Amanda strap you in and push you down the hill because she's not gonna catch you, like, I I didn't get in trouble for that because he had a disability. I got in trouble for that because you don't do that to your brother or
Ye
anybody
Yeah,
else,
exactly, like, even yeah, if he was normal and you did that, bad things would still happen, like, that doesn't matter,
right?
yeah.
And I think that that settled well with me. Like, that made us, like, be rarely little different. Like, I don't know, I just, sometimes we were just normal siblings, as normal as we could be, right? And trying to take the disability out of the equation.
Yeah, and that's so important, like, and that's such an interesting point about kind of, um, like, the caregiving conversation, because it's been really interesting to talk to a variety of siblings on this podcast, like, all over the world and a lot in the US, right? And it's so interesting, like, how different different people have different mindsets and people are different ages and there's there's people I've met who are they're working on their guardianship conservatorship paperwork. There's people who are past that. There's people who like have no idea, and there's all these things. And it's interesting because there's a few people that I've met where like they're they are not the primary caretaker. They're just like, but they're like the main contact just because of like, their parents or whatever. But there's other people who are very much like kind of in your boat where they know what's coming, and there's other people where they're already in it. And it's interesting because I think like yourself have always been a big proponent of like, there are people who the healthiest decision for them and their family and their sibling is for them to not be involved. Right. And that's a little bit more of an extreme thing than what you're saying, but I am a very big advocate for that because it's like if me as a sibling is in a worse position mentally and emotionally, financially and all of that, and I can't support my sibling or be in a caregiving role, like then that it's okay for you not to do that if that's going to jeopardize any part of your like health in any form.
Like your well-being.
Yeah, and that's so important for I think for everyone to realize that whether you're a sibling or not, because just because it's I never thought about it as a cultural expectation, kind of like what you're saying, but like, oh, I guess that makes sense because I guess no one really has other types of responses. Maybe I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but it's an interesting thought to think about how people kind of have this assumption that siblings will take over, even though that's not necessarily the best practice or what they want either.
Well, long-term supports as a society struggles for so many reasons, right? Like, I think so. Let's put it in reference to, senior citizens, like my family, when they age, when my parents age, like we all go through life, right? Like, so what's going to happen to my parents? Are they going to go into a nursing home? Am I going to get paid support to come in if they happen to get Alzheimer's, or, once they can't take care of themselves, like aging parents also require some type of level of support. And that typically falls on what the children choose to do or have the means to be able to do, right? And that is different for every family. Like I know my mom's wishes, she does not want to live in a nursing home. Like that is my mom's wishes. So I'm like, okay, are you going to move in with me? Like, is that what we're talking about? Like, so financially, they're having to already think because they're aging, right? Like, think about if they ever personally become, there's just not a lot of support. So you can get, uh, assisted living. There's assisted living like day programs for aging families, right? For aging individuals. So you already, it's a natural conversation that happens sometimes that we don't really talk about it even. It's just when it happens, oh crap, what am I gonna do with my mom and my dad, right? Or what's in their will, or we just sometimes as families don't have that. Well, that gets more complicated when there is a sibling that has a disability and they're going to also require long-term living supports. But see, that's not the whole world's not impacted by that. You're only
Mm.
impacted,
Okay.
but yet we take care of so many options and there's so many great options out there for senior citizens, but we're not putting into because our siblings, like, my brother would not do well in a nursing home when he is in his if something was to happen to my parents and he's in his 50s, right? Like, with senior citizens. So, but I think the world that's not impacted, their assumption is that the family's just gonna take care of it, no different than in a like a senior citizen, like, as an aging
Oh, interesting.
family.
Okay.
So, like, it's meant for the family to figure that out, and I wish that I could change the mindset of one, for families to start talking about that a little bit more, right? But also the mindset of society of we have to come up with more options because group homes are not they were designed for families that are leaving their children, not they weren't designed financially to be supported for the good families. They're not
Interesting.
that's not what it was meant they were created out of families leaving their children to an institution or not providing care to them. And so unfortunately, the government and how funding works is really not to take care, which sucks, right? It's not
Yeah.
fair for the good families that just need an independent living option
Yes.
to where they can just live life. Like it's the but there's that's not how it was designed. And group homes are not in order for them to have more money to be supported for group homes to really explode, which there needs to be more. Um, the government will have to look at that differently. And they
Okay.
are not currently looking at that the same. And this is my life. This is what I live all the time. Like I have group homes in my nonprofit. So um, this is what I live and this is what I navigate for families. And so it's the society assumption that most people that if they're not impacted, they assume and they expect for families to take care of their own family.
And that's so interesting because now that we've like isolated that as its own conversation, what I'm really like intrigued about now is like the conservatorship guardianship conversation. And it's what's interesting about this now is like that is a different conversation than actually caregiving. Like those are very related topics, but I don't think I've ever thought about those two as two separate topics. Because I think when I was growing up, I think in my head I just assumed like, oh yeah, guardianship is equal to caregiving, but it's not. And that's something that I'm so glad that we're like picking it apart because that's such an interesting. I mean, even for me to think about, because my sister fortunately is in a situation where like my parents joined with other parents and they built their own privatized housing, and so she's basically set for life as long as like have like the agencies come and things like that, we have people come in. But it's so interesting because it's like that helps me so much because I know that like I mean I love my sister, but caregiving for her 24/7 is not my cup of tea, and
Right.
that's fine, right? And that's not my cup of tea, but like I can be the one facilitating it, and as like her and as the person like who's next in line after my parents on her conservatorship work, right? Like I don't mind. That's not an issue. Like, and I never had a problem with that. I always knew like I'm fine with like doing her books, with like communicating with people, like that's not an issue for me, right? And but that is a different conversation than saying she's going to live with me in my house. And that's a very different like ballpark of commitment and um yeah, that those are two very different conversations that are important to have with everyone.
Well, and I think that guardianship, as it's a hard conversation for a lot of parents, like going into when they turn 18, like, do I file for guardianship? Are they going to continue to will they be their own guardian? Those type of things. But guardianship, just like you said, guardianship is different than caretaking. And the role of the guardian, whoever's declared the guardian, whether that's their families and or their sibling, is to ensure their health, safety, and welfare are being able to be executed and met in their well-being, right? That doesn't mean that the choice of them living like that a guardianship is automatically caretaking. But those lines are very, very blurred in this society and what that looks like. And I think even families don't always know the right information of how to navigate what that looks like. And so I would love to, not necessarily on live on this podcast, but I'm trying to coach families of different ways to not be so dependent, possibly on an agency or a group home but also not like dependent on just your family dynamic to be the forever caregiver
Mm-hmm.
for the individual. So like I would love to hear the model of how your family decided to do that because by doing that and setting that up is the best gift to you as a sibling. 100% the best gift. It's to honor you, right? That is their best way to honor you.
Yeah. So from what I can remember, in terms of like yeah, just how it worked out. So they when she turned 18, so I think they did all her like we did all her conservatorship paperwork first, and then they started going to all the housing meetings like locally with all sorts of things, which I didn't go to any of those, which is fine. I as me as like a 22-year-old doesn't need to be part of that process. But what I do remember is at some point they met this couple, and their goal, and it was their goal to like build the housing. So what that this couple, they have two boys. Their older one has a disability. Their younger one is a typical. And so what they did was they visited a bunch of different housing communities. I think just on the West Coast. Um, and so they found these two locations that they really liked, and they basically wanted to make like a hybrid version of both of them. So because they didn't want to do one or the other, but they're like, hey, we like this part of A, we like this part of B. Let's just combine and make C, and do their own. And so they were going to a bunch of different like conferences and meetings to meet parents who wanted to like partake in that. And so my parents joined their like it's not a co-op, or maybe it's yeah, but they joined them. And then so what they did was they formed an LLC with like I think at that time it was 10 families total. So it was like 10 sets of parents. And it's interesting because there's parents, right? There's people who like are divorced, there's people who are single parents and stuff. So it's not like it's limited to like, oh, you have to be married and whatever, right? Because all sorts of different situations. And the other interesting thing was like all the kids, and I mean they're not kids, they're adult children, but there's a whole age range, and all their disabilities are different, right? Because they couldn't have a situation where like they were all one specific type, because then the diversity isn't like there's all of these kind of like fine print things. And so what they did was they formed this LLC. They bought this plot of land from this older lady, like, and it was like she I don't know how many acres it is, which I should find out, but she owned like a big plot of land. And so what they did was they basically split the land in half. And so what they did was this LLC, so they have like the privatized housing community, which all the parents are owners in that. But they also what they simultaneously did in the front of their property, like where like more at street level, is that they made a nonprofit farm. Um, and so what they did was then all the residents who wanted to work on the farm could then work on the farm as part of like their routines and stuff like that. But they are close enough to like a downtown area where they could still do like their day programs if they want to go to the park, go swimming, and do all their kind of like more
Yeah.
activity based things. And so they set that up. So they had to build all their housing from scratch. And so then after they had that, so then they opened up for more families to join after like they had already built the bottom infrastructure. But what they also are doing is they have and I'm gonna mess up the wording on this, but they basically have um like mixed living where you have like typical they have like college students
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
nearby, right, they're like renting a house, so they have like you have like neurotypical kids who are living there, then you have the residents who are disabled, and you kind of have like a more hybrid version of that where right where people can have like mixed living and like learn about each other, and it gives them a pretty realistic more realistic view of like interacting with people and stuff. And so every how it works is like with the families that have vested into it. So they have each house, I think, can house like 3 or 4 residents. And so what they did is they divided the house like obviously by gender, and they kind of did it by agency. So like my sister and her housemates, they all have the same like they're working with the same agency. So it's like one phone call. You can kind of like they all work together, which makes it really really nice. And obviously like my sister needs like 24/7 care, so that's a little bit different depending on like who like each kiddo and stuff like that. So like I've met like her staff, and obviously like my parents are there working that out, and they're working with her housemates' parents to then like coordinate schedules and stuff. But that's kind of like a rough layout of what I understand at my level of how it works.
awesome. Yeah, no, I would be very interested to see the model for sure.
So I think my parents joined in somewhere around 2017 because we took this family picture in front of this sign like on the property like before anything was built. So we
Yeah,
took that picture like 2017, and then my sister moved in the fall of 2021 into like a 99% finished house. Like there's just some like minor things, but for the most part like that was when it was movable. And it was cool because they moved everyone in phases, just because you can't move necessarily like 10 kids at once
right,
to like yeah.
right, right.
Yeah, but
Wow, that's
it's
awesome.
yeah, but it definitely created it was at the time I was like, "Oh, this is cool," right? Like I'm not thinking about it super a lot, but it really made a difference once me and my husband were looking at like owning a house. And that like it changed everything because I didn't have to worry about her. I didn't have to go like, "Oh, I need to like be here for this or here for that." I was like I could basically move anywhere I wanted, and it wouldn't be an issue as long as I had, like a phone number and internet or whatever. Like it's not, and that is very like, and I recognize that not every sibling is in that circumstance, and I
Right.
acknowledge that, but I will say like that it's a very for me it was a very big deal, and it's very like life altering in a very positive way for me. Obviously like it's different for everyone, but
Absolutely,
it's definitely
absolutely.
it's changed. Yeah, anything since me and my husband have moved, it's because I don't have to worry about her. Like she's there, it's permanent, and I'm a phone call away. It's fine. Right? If there was a real emergency, I will get on a plane. Not an issue.
Yeah, well, and I think that to like you acknowledging that not everybody has that, but every family in the whole entire world have different dynamics. If it's not a disability friend the family, then there could be other cards that are dealt that a family has to navigate to be able to figure out their story, and their journey would be different than somebody else, whether their sibling becomes an addict, or they're terminally ill with cancer, or there's so many different storylines of complex that create complex issues that a family has to navigate through. And so if I wasn't dealing with this, I might be dealing with something else. So I think that that puts things in perspective for me, that not every family's perfect, and so we're just as imperfect as anybody else.
And I think like it was interesting because back to when you were talking about softball and that kind of being part of your like that's what kind of what you did to isolate so that you could have your identity. I did the same thing, but like with music. And so I just like I was in band, like in school band, like all the time. I would practice all the time, and I was like at home practice. Like it was a thing that and it was funny because no one in my family is musical, like, at all, even, like, my extended family, so it was the one thing I'm like, "It's mine," and I listening to you talk about it was like, "Oh, that's interesting," 'cause I literally did the same thing because 'cause I'm like, "If I don't have that, like, then who am I? Because I'm just Angela's sister and that's it."
Well, and softball actually was a gift to my entire family. So, like, it created a gift for me, right, in my own entity. However, what it did is it gave my family something to look forward to, like the games, and then, just
Oh.
this, you know, I became on a team that like, even though the families didn't understand our dynamics, they embraced it and like figured out. So like it became this, my family is very isolating. And so it became a social outlet that we wouldn't otherwise have if I didn't have softball. And then for my brother, it gave him the opportunities to be social in a very people got used to our routines, right? So like once they realized that my brother was obsessed with the concession stand, he only lived for the concession stand, then like people were sneaking him money, like he would go up to and they would just give him money. So like it became something he looked forward to. And we like, even now as an adult and some of my former teammates, they are huge advocates for those with disabilities or experiences in their own kids because of my brother and what
Oh,
they
that's so
remembered.
cool,
So
yeah.
really softball gave us a gift as an outlet for my entire family, but it gave us something to talk about that wasn't disability related.
That's such an important topic as a general statement, right? To find whatever that topic is that's not related to like logistics, your brother or sister, your parents, like what like have something fun. Like talk about amusement parks or TV shows like that. Yeah, definitely have some outlet of some sort that's not that cuz yeah, when I think about it like it's interesting because so much of the conversation I have, even with my parents now and growing up, is it's a lot about my sister, even if it's not directly related. It's very much like, you could draw like two dots to it and then you would be there.
Right.
But it was nice when like we would have family dinners when I was like really little and they're like, "What did you do at school today?" And it was nice because I got my like 5 minutes of soapbox, on my soapbox to be like, "Oh, I did this and this," and I think that was really important, especially when I was like really young, right? Because then that's like you get to talk about I get to talk about me, and it's like that's a for siblings, I think that's such a important thing because even now as an adult, right, I will struggle to talk about me because I'll like, if I'm like with a bunch of people, I'm like, oh, like I'll let them talk, oh, they can fight it out, like, oh, I'll provide the solution, whatever. And I'm like, well, no, like if I want to eat pizza, I have the ability to say I want to go eat pizza. Like I'll see you guys in 5 minutes after I get it, and that's okay. And that took so long for me to
Mm,
get to that point where I didn't feel ashamed or guilty or anything about saying that because I just wanted something different than what people were talking about.
right. No, I think you even like, it's funny, the toxic traits that I have as an adult stemmed from maybe some of the things that, because I was a sibling. So, like, for example, to your point, um, I typically don't celebrate my accomplishments.
Hmm.
So, and I don't do, I play small, like I make myself small. And there's a lot of things I have done, like writing a children's book and all of these things. And but I remember like every milestone. Not, it wasn't that it was declared as a rule we don't celebrate, but we just didn't, we kind of skirted by me getting my driver's license, and we didn't make it a big deal because my brother will never get his driver's license. Like when I turned 21 and I could finally drink, we had to like skirt around that because my brother, when he's not drinking. So like it was, like report cards. If we were celebrating something for me of what I did, I didn't want to because it kind of highlighted more what my brother couldn't do. All my what I could do
Mm.
always highlighted what my brother couldn't do. And that's and so now, even as an adult, even though that my brother is totally oblivious to what I do,
Yeah.
I still find myself having a hard time celebrating because I'm so worried about what the other how that would make the other person next to me feel.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I know that that comes from being a sibling, and just trying to make yourself small, to allow other people. So we learn very quickly how to be selfless, and because that was the act of survival. Like you couldn't really be selfish because there was no time to be. That has been something I've learned as an adult too. I don't know. I let people, for you to say, like, I want pizza, it's okay. Like, I'm giving myself permission to go get the pizza just because you don't want that. But because us as kids, we might have sacrificed to not get the pizza so that way it would have not caused maybe issues or conflict or barriers. So we made the sacrifices to eat McDonald's, right? Because McDonald's was a routine.
Oh, it was. So, like, I don't even know the last time I ate McDonald's because I swear every time I see it, I'm just like, I don't. It brings me no happiness, really. Like, it just because I just think about. Yeah, think about all the car rides, all the times we've had to like sneak it into other places, right? Because she wouldn't eat not McDonald's and all these things. Like it's yeah, I remember the day that like we found out she would eat In and Out. She would eat the burgers and we didn't have to bring McDonald's. I was so
My
excited. Yeah, it was like mind blowing, earth shattering. Like it was such a big deal. I was like, finally, we don't have to like go. Yeah, that was a big deal.
It's the little things, right? Like that we hold on to that moment. And I think that's the funny part is even though I can recount these, it's been very hard for me to share some of this in my book that's coming out because I'm like, my mom is going to read this book. A lot of what I'm sharing,
Yeah.
my mom doesn't even know, right? That I felt a certain way. And it's out of protection of her. She didn't do anything wrong, like I loved my childhood. I loved the memories of my childhood, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't emotionally impacted by my childhood. And so now I've been able to put a voice to that in my hopes to impact other people to navigate the journey like, oh, I'm not alone. Like it's okay to feel this way. She turned out okay, like I'm not a bad person. So yeah, it's been very interesting connecting with other siblings along this journey. I work beside two other professionals that are siblings, and all of our like one sibling, her brother has autism, and the other sibling, he's actually a twin and he has cerebral palsy, and he doesn't live at home. He lives in a ICF facility, and like she visit him, like she doesn't go by without visiting him like daily, and like all the things like so it's just hearing her stories as a kid were different than mine. And one of the things that I found myself being very jealous, I guess, of her situation. I was always jealous, and I am to this day. Jealousy, I just wish that I had other siblings, like to
Mm.
share. That's the only thing I wish was different, that I just had like this other sibling that's what I'm missing out on. Like, I wouldn't trade my brother for the world, but like, I won't be an aunt. And it's just the little things. I'm like, I would be such a cool ass aunt.
No, yeah. Oh no, I remember thinking that thought like way earlier in life too. Not even as an adult. Like I would be like 15 and I'm like, wait, like but I've never like my sister can be an aunt and she'll be cool cuz she'll just be hanging out and like chill.
Right.
But then I don't get to be that in return. I'm like that I was like, oh, that's such a bummer. Like, which is it's so interesting that you brought like that specific thing up because it's something where like even like now as I think about that, I tell you that I'm like, oh, that's such like an in passing thing. Like, I would just like go to sleep and it just came across and went away. But like I now realize as I talk, I'm like, oh, that's like not a normal thing normal kids necessarily like think about. Well, maybe it is. I have no idea. I know I thought about it a lot.
I'm sure if it was like, the only child, if maybe, there's wishing that maybe they had a sibling, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, I think like sometimes I see, my cousins, have kids and like there's a bond between, I'm like, their kids are growing up together. Like I'm kind of jealous of that. Right. But that doesn't make me, I think that's the hard part. I can be jealous without being resentful. And I don't think we're giving ourselves permission to be jealous without being resentful. And just because I communicate my jealousy or what I wish that I could do doesn't mean that I wish my life was different or that I wish my brother was different. And I don't think we give the ability to pair those together.
Even giving yourself permission to feel anything, period, that's like, quote unquote, not negative. Like, I spent the better part of my growing up, even like into my 20s, like, oh, I feel this, any negative emotion, I'll just suppress it and I'll just do something else, right? I'll
Mhm.
go practice music, I'll go like read a book, I'll like drench myself in work to not feel it just because I thought it was wrong, right? I was like, my parents, like, I'm like, oh, like, I don't want, they don't seem upset, so like, I shouldn't be upset, or like, but then that's not healthy either, because like, for me, it just ended up being in a phase of being very resentful where I was just like lashing out at everyone, which is a whole different kind of story, but like, just, yeah, like, you can feel sad, and it's better for you to give yourself permission to feel sad for like an hour than it is to suppress it, then feel it, for decades later and lash it onto people.
Absolutely. You're entitled to feel it, you're entitled to work through it, and you just can't stay there, but that's fine.
Yeah, and don't do anything to like endanger yourself or other people, but you can feel it. Like, it's just feel it and then go to the next thing, and like, it's fine. And that's a healthy choice to make. I guess with that, do you have any words of encouragement for our fellow siblings out there?
Wow, that's could be a loaded question, I guess. I think I've shared little nuggets along the way, I think, but I think every season of life, just know that you're gonna figure it out and move through it. Like, every season might bring something, just when the guilt that I felt as a kid is not the same guilt I feel now, and, like, those are gonna come up with life experiences. When I got married, I felt a lot of emotions and people couldn't understand it, but a lot of those emotions came back because it was just some reminders of the things that I have to navigate through because of my brother, right? And so when I had kids, the same thing. So I think just be prepared that and figure out a way to be able to communicate how you feel without being trying to justify, or like, you don't have to justify anything. And so I think just figuring out whether, if you can't articulate that, then journal that, right? Like, somehow get those emotions out for you to start to understand. Don't let it be your identity is wrapped up in all these unfamiliar emotions and you don't know who you are. And luckily I've been able to figure out what that is along my journey, but and me coaching a lot of siblings over the last years, I just realized I don't think our families or the world understands we're kind of a lost people. Like, we're the last to be considered. And just as much as like all of these support groups and parents and are trying to find their community and battle isolation and battle their identity, you know, we're doing the same thing, but we can't express that, right? And so just figure out a way, whether you journal that, like, or leaving a letter or writing a note to your family to have, like, just find your outlet, find your way to be able to do that, to not hold that in, to not bottle that up. Whether it is seeing a therapist, like, nothing has to be wrong. And I think that's the mentality of the world, is that something has to be wrong, or you must hate your life or your sibling if you feel like you need therapy to move through that. And that's so far from the truth. It is really giving you the healthy relationship with yourself and the healthy boundaries that you need to navigate what most people can't tell you how to navigate. And so I'm giving you that permission to feel what you need to feel and figure out the outlet in order to be able to share that.
Great stuff. There's so many good things, both like, throughout and at the end. So excited. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, Amanda.
No, thank you for having me, and I look forward to hopefully connecting with other siblings along the way.
Yay. Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.